Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Overwatch League fan thoughts and analysis. Today, we're going to be, of course, covering Stage 2, Week 2 of Season 2 of the Overwatch League. But before we do that, let's take a look back at Week 1 of Stage 2 and how I did with my picks. Starting Thursday, April 4th. First game was the New York Excelsior taking on the Philadelphia Fusion. NYXL walked away with a victory there. It was a 4-0 victory. A clean 4-0 victory for New York. Very dominant victory. That was my big pick game for that day. New York looks like their loss to Seoul really was a one-time thing. They still look very, very good, and they still look like a team that will be quite the challenge going forward in the league and the rest of the season. So next we have the Boston Uprising taking down the Atlanta Reign. Boston Uprising with a reverse sweep. Big win for them. They are starting to really establish themselves as a pretty solid team. The LA Gladiators beating the Shanghai Dragons. Not really a big surprise to me. I thought the Dragons played pretty well, but the Gladiators look like a very, very, very strong team at this point in the season. And I think they're only going to get better from here. And the Guangzhou Charge fall to the Paris Eternal. Somewhat surprising to me. The Guangzhou Charge are a team definitely on a skid. It seems like they may have already hit their peak and are now starting to kind of crumble and fall apart. The Eternal had a big win there, the 4-0 win. It was a win that gave me some promise for the Eternal, but we'll get back to the Eternal here in a little bit. But I thought it was a good win for them. Didn't get to watch most of it because it was at an hour that made it pretty much impossible for me to watch it reasonably. But I thought it was a pretty good win for them, seeing as it was a 4-0. Next on Friday, we had the London Spitfire taking on the Florida Mayhem and walking away with a victory. Not a massive victory for London, but a victory nonetheless. London needs to start looking better, I think, against some of these worst teams. They seem to be playing at a similar level to a lot of the teams that they have played, even when they're better than those teams. So London, I think, needs to get some nice wins. We'll talk about that, though, in a little bit here. But next, we had the Toronto Defiant taking on the Washington Justice in a game that the Toronto Defiant would win. Closer than I think most people expected. I think the Washington Justice look a lot better already this stage. I think adding Arc was a huge, huge, huge bonus for this team, a huge, huge addition for this team. And I really think they look much stronger. I think Florida Mayhem also look a lot stronger too. Obviously, just talked about them in the last game. Two teams that have been sitting towards the bottom, made some big roster moves. Justice by adding Arc, Mayhem by going to an all-Korean roster. Very interesting moves for both of these teams. It'll be interesting to see what they look like going forward. And I think that they don't play again for a while, the Justice and the Mayhem. So it'll be a good rematch to see who is better when they meet again. Next, we had the California Cup, the San Francisco Shock, taking on the LA Valiant, which would have been my big pick if the Valiant weren't so struggling. They weren't struggling so much. Shock won that game pretty easily. Wasn't really much of a challenge for them, walking away with a victory there against the Valiant. I think the Valiant have made some smarter decisions. I think not having Kariv play was a much smarter decision. I don't think he is the answer for this team, but I do think they need to find another really good and strong DPS player. I think that's really where they're lacking right now. They have really good support players in Custa and Izayaki. I think their tank line is incredible with Space and Fate. Those are two very good tank players. It's just you have that DPS position that I think is really holding them back. They haven't had a very good Zarya player. They haven't looked that consistent in that DPS role. We saw some KSF Zarya as opposed to Kariv Zarya, which I think looked a little bit better. But against the Shock, it's a very tough team to kind of judge how good you are just because the Shock are so good right now. You only really have so much that you can do against them. Next, for my big pick game on Friday, I took the Seoul Dynasty over the LA Gladiators. It was a close series, a 3-2 series, but ultimately the LA Gladiators walked away with the win. That was the only game that Seoul played this week. I thought it was a very good game for Seoul, even though they lost. They to me are really 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 climbing up those rankings. I think they look better and better and better every week. The Gladiators also look better and better every week, and I think the Gladiators had a lot more time to kind of sit down, adjust to the meta. And I think Decay is an animal. He's played incredibly well so far. He is going to be a dangerous player in this league. And I really think that what we have seen from the LA Gladiators and the Seoul Dynasty are two teams that are going to be very good by the end of the season. But ultimately, the Gladiators walk away with the win here. Not super surprising. I think the Gladiators have played very well. I thought they played very well. They ruined Fissure's undefeated streak against his former teams. But I think when you look at the way the teams played, to me, what was interesting with the Dynasty was they never played Fleta. Um, I don't really know why. I don't know if they ever explained why they didn't play Fleta. I don't know if he was sick. I have no idea. He just never played, which to me was weird, and I don't think that was the smart decision if it wasn't a sickness thing, because I think Fleta is such a good player. And part of me wonders how the series would have gone if Fleta was in. It was a 3-2 series, so it was a very close series, but obviously what if questions are not going to do us much good at this point in time. Next, we go on to Saturday, where we have the Florida Mayhem rematch with the Philadelphia Fusion. The only win the Florida Mayhem have so far this season was against the Philadelphia Fusion in Week 2. And the Philadelphia Fusion really shut the door on that. Getting a victory here over the Florida Mayhem. Wasn't a crazy convincing victory, but it was a victory that made you think that at least the Philadelphia Fusion look like they have some idea of what's going on. But I really think that the Philadelphia Fusion are one of those teams that are at the upper edge of these kind of teams that are just fighting to be anything. And then you have your teams that are just so far ahead of every other team in the league. It's not even funny, with Vancouver and New York and Seoul, or not Seoul, San Francisco. And those are the three teams I think right now are really, really strong and look like they are leaps and bounds ahead of every other team in the league. Obviously, the occasional slip up here with San Francisco, two of those losses that they have, coming against New York and Vancouver. New York had that loss to Seoul in the playoffs, but ultimately I still think those three teams are the top teams in the league, and the Fusion look to be one of those teams that are below them, trying to get to that upper level, but they just haven't quite looked great so far this season. But they've had a relatively easy schedule so far. They haven't played many of their tough opponents yet. Of course, they played New York, but I still think right now they're a team that has a good chance at getting to that playoffs at the end of the season. I think they should at this point in time, but it's a matter of how well they continue to play from here on out. Next, we have the Boston Uprising beating the Toronto Defiant in the big pick game of the week. I did not pick the Uprising. I took the Defiant to once again beat the Uprising. Uprising with another reverse sweep. 3 straight reverse sweeps for the Boston Uprising. Dallas Fuel, Atlanta Reign, Toronto Defiant. First team in the Overwatch League to win 3 straight reverse sweeps. Boston Uprising, like I said, look like they are getting much, much better. They look incredible. I think they have looked like easily one of the best teams in that second tier. I think you have the Uprising, you have the Defiant, and I think you have Seoul, and you have the Gladiators as kind of these teams that are kind of like getting to that top position if they can keep playing the way they're playing and they can keep kind of improving. The Gladiators right now, to me, are one really good win away from getting to that upper level. But to me, the Uprising are consistently getting better. They're improving week in, they're improving week out, and I'm really excited to see what becomes of this Uprising squad by the end of the season. Next game we have is the New York Excelsior taking on the Shanghai Dragons. New York won that game 3-0. Interesting game. I thought Shanghai played very well. I think Shanghai had a really rough week. I still think they're a strong team. I thought they played pretty well against the Gladiators. I thought they played pretty well against New York. For a team that I think has played pretty well in general, I'm impressed. They lost both games, but I still think they were a very worthy opponent both games, and I thought that they were one of the teams that impressed me this week in losses. Then we have the Chengdu Hunters 4-0 victory over the Paris Eternal. Surprising to me. But the Chengdu Hunters look so much better this stage than they did in stage one. I thought they started looking much better towards the end of stage one. They played very well against Vancouver. But here in stage two, I think they are going to really, really shine. I think they're going to start looking incredible. They're going to start looking a lot better, in my opinion, now that we are in stage two. Wrecking Ball had that change to his adaptive shielding, which I think makes him so much better as a hero. Among is just, I mean, he is the apex Chad. I mean, he is the Giga Chad. I mean, he is as Chad can be, and he has been amazing so far this stage. Obviously, that was their first game, but they did play 2 games, and we'll get to that one here at the end of Sunday. But speaking of Sunday, let's start with the San Francisco Shock taking on the Guangzhou Charge, beating them 4-0. I don't want to talk too much about this game because they play again in week 2. We have the London Spitfire beating the Atlanta Reign. 4-0 victory for the Spitfire, if I remember correctly, which was a good win for London. London finally getting one of those wins that they really needed. A really big win over a team that is pretty good, but London has kind of been in that same middle of the pack area so far this stage. And this season, a win against the Reign really helps them kind of get to that better wins, upper tier team, in my opinion. With the Vancouver Titans taking on the Hangzhou Spark, people were hyping up Hangzhou, thinking Hangzhou would be a really good team this stage, and while I think they were impressive in a lot of instances, the Titans are still the Titans. 4-0 victory for them. It's really hard to beat the Titans right now. I don't think they're going to go as easily this stage, and it's not so much scheduling. I think that this stage is going to be potentially slightly weaker for them. They were a very good team in Triple Triple and Goats, but I'm curious to see how they are in a more DPS heavy meta. Obviously, Stitch played in this game, who played a little bit in stage 1 every once in a while, but they had him in for the entire match against Hangzhou. Interesting game, but the Titans ultimately came away with a huge win there. Finally, Chengdu Hunters with a 3-1 victory over the Washington Justice. Really shouldn't have been that close, to be quite honest with you. Or actually should have been somewhat closer. I mean, the Washington Justice had several chances to win multiple maps, and the Hunters just shut them down. And that, to me, is really where the Justice have struggled. They haven't been able to close out maps. They haven't been able to win those major engagements at the end of games in overtime, in bonus rounds. And that, to me, was where the Hunters really shone, is they really held the point. They just kind of kept playing chaotic. They kept playing in a way that the Justice just looked uncomfortable. And while I think the Justice have improved incredibly since the beginning of the season, and I think the addition of Arc really was helpful for that, they're still struggling a little bit. And I still think that they have some room for improvement. But they beat the Defiant in one map. They beat the Hunters in one map. They're taking some maps. They're not getting 4-0'd, which I think is a huge step for the Justice. I think it shows that this team is growing and this team is getting better every single week. But that is everything from week 1. My weekly record, as you can see, was 12-4. My overall big pick record right now is 13-9, which is kind of surprising when you reflect it with my overall record, because you got, so far we're at 86 games, and I have a 65% pick rate there. But then when you look at that 24 big pick rate, or 24 big pick games, I'm sitting at 54% there. So we'll see what happens as the season goes on. I'm hoping my record starts to improve. But let's take a lookie at my picks for week 2. The very first game we have going on here is the Paris Eternal taking on the Florida Mayhem. I still really like the Paris Eternal in this game, mainly because I'm not super crazy about the Florida Mayhem. I don't think they've looked great still, and I think that they are a team that still has a lot of room for improvement. Obviously, just made those massive roster changes. Paris Eternal, I think, are struggling still a little bit. Chengdu is a hard team, I think, to really judge them against, because Chengdu is such a weird team. And they don't play like every other team in the league, which I think has started to really work in their favor, because people think that they know how to prepare for them, and then it turns out they don't. So it'll be interesting to see this matchup, but I think the Eternal walk away with that one. Next, the New York Excelsior taking on the Washington Justice. Second time that these two teams are going up against each other already. This will be the first time Arc plays against his former team. And I think this will be a loss for the Washington Justice. New York Excelsior, to me, still look like the strongest team in the league. No real reason to pick against them yet, in my opinion. I think this is a pretty easy week for New York. And we'll talk about that when we get to their last game of the week. But New York wins, in my eyes, probably 4-0, but we'll see. Next are the Vancouver Titans against the Seoul Dynasty. Rematch, of course, of that playoff semifinal from the stage playoffs. Vancouver Titans dominated Seoul in that game. I don't expect it to be any different. We'll see if Fleta plays this game or not, but yeah, I expect the Titans to once again walk away with the victory here. No real reason, in my opinion, to pick against the team that I think is playing the best Overwatch right now. Finally, my big pick game of the week, or the day, not the week, the day, is the Toronto Defiant against Philadelphia Fusion. I'm going to take the Defiant. Little bit weird in the position they're in right now, of course. Losing Stellar, bringing in IM37, who, to me, stole the show in his interview with Danny Lim. Fantastic interview. Loved it. I was laughing, actually, like, literally laughing out loud, watching that interview while alone on my couch. So it was a great time. Anyway, big game, I think, for both of these teams. This is really kind of the where do you stack up game. If the Fusion can walk away with this victory, they kind of show there's still this team that was grand finalist since season 1. If the Defiant win, they can say, look, we lost this last game, but we're still a very powerful team. We may have lost a player, but ultimately we are still a team that is one of the best, and we should not be messed with. So, big game for me, but I think the Defiant do walk away with the win. I've been more impressed with them recently. I think they have been the better team as of late, and I'm going to roll with them for now. Next, we have Friday. The first game on Friday is the Atlanta Reign against the LA Valiant. No offense to the Atlanta Reign fans out there, but I think this is, so far this season, the Valiant's best chance at winning a game. I think the Reign right now are kind of in shambles. They're in a very weird position with the way the team is going. The Valiant, to me, though, still a very, very, very questionable team. Still a team in shambles, a team that I don't really know how to feel about them. And I ultimately just think that at the end of the day, it just comes simply down to the fact that the Valiant still struggle, and I think that you have to give the win to a team that, though they haven't been playing their best Overwatch recently, have been playing significantly better Overwatch than the Valiant. So, I'm taking the Reign in this one. Next, we have the Boston Uprising against the Hangzhou Spark. I just praised the Uprising for a little while before, and that is going to be something that I still do, because I think the Uprising have looked incredible as of late. They've been one of the better teams, in my opinion. And I think that they beat the Spark, who still look a little bit questionable, in my opinion. Next, we have the San Francisco Shock take on the Guangzhou Charge. Like I said, they play again. Shock absolutely stomped the Charge. I expect the same thing again. I really don't like the fact that these two teams are playing in back-to-back weeks. I think it's honestly horrible, horrible, horrible scheduling. I've made an entire video about this, obviously, but it shouldn't happen, but it is happening, and I think the Shock are going to win again. And I feel bad for the Charge because there's nothing they can do about it. Next, we have my big pick game for Friday, which is the Chengdu Hunters against the Shanghai Dragons, which is a rematch already. They played last stage, but here we go again. Shanghai Dragons walked away with a victory when these two teams met in Stage 1. And I think it's going to be a really good game. I think the Dragons obviously have had a somewhat tough slate of opponents so far in this stage with New York and with the Gladiators. And I think there's a really good chance for the Dragons to kind of settle down and say, yes, we are a good team. We are a team that is strong. We have the ability to win. We're just kind of playing some tough teams right now, some teams that are better than us. And I think that the Dragons can prove it here. But ultimately, I think the Chengdu Hunters have just looked really dominant in this stage. surprisingly, even though they don't run anything similar to any other team. Um, they're hard to prepare for. They do things differently. They're weird. They're unique, and I'm excited to see them against Shanghai, who has been doing some weird and unique stuff recently as well. But I think it has been working as well as they would like. So ultimately, I think the Chengdu Hunters walk away with this win. Next, on Saturday, we have the London Spitfire taking on the Philadelphia Fusion. That is my big pick game, a rematch of the first game of Season 2, a rematch of the Grand Finals of Season 1. And I picked the Spitfire the first time these two teams played, and the Fusion won. And you'd think I would have learned my lesson, but I'm going to pick the Spitfire again. I think they've looked better as of late. The Fusion have been somewhat lackluster recently, and I think the Spitfire in general have just been a better team, a stronger team, and they don't play before this game. While the Fusion have to prepare for the Defiant and the Spitfire. It's a tough week for the Fusion. This is kind of the gauntlet for them. They're starting to play some of these tough games that they didn't get in Stage 1. I think this is a good week where we kind of can see where the Fusion are as a team. But right now I'm thinking the Spitfire take this one away from the Fusion. Next, we have the Vancouver Titans taking on the Houston Outlaws. Houston Outlaws did not play at all in Week 1 of Stage 2. And they get the luck of the draw by pulling the Vancouver Titans for their first game of Stage 2. It's a rough game for them. They're going to lose. That is something that I am going to guarantee right here, right now. They are going to lose this game. The Houston Outlaws have about a 0% chance of winning against the Vancouver Titans. I think Houston's still a decent team, but Vancouver is just so good that you don't really beat them if you're Houston. So, sorry, Houston, but I just don't see it. Next, we have the Dallas Fuel taking on the Toronto Defiant. Dallas Fuel also playing their first game of the stage. A little bit of an easier game for them, but they take on the Toronto Defiant, who I am picking over the Fuel. I'm not convinced that the Fuel are all that impressive, or in general, all that great of a team. And I think the Defiant still are good. I mean, the Fuel lost to Boston. Defiant have beaten Boston and lost to Boston, but I think the Defiant are a really strong team. I think they look better than the Fuel. And though the Fuel haven't had to prep for any other games before this one, I still think the Defiant are a really good team, and I see them walking away from this one with a victory. Next, final game for Saturday is the LA Gladiators taking on the Guangzhou Charge. I'm taking the Gladiators. They've looked really strong. The Charge have had a really unlucky draw here. The Gladiators beat the Charge in Stage 1. Charge have not won a map since the last time they played the Gladiators in their second to last game of Stage 1, and they have played 3 games since. So, Charge are on a skid, a really bad skid, and I think that the Gladiators are looking impressive, and they're looking better and better by the week. We'll look at the standings here in a little bit, of course, after I go through all these picks, but they have climbed. They have gotten much higher in the rankings. They're doing a lot better, obviously, and I think it's going to be somewhat problematic for the Charge. Finally, we have Sunday, April 14th. My big pick game of the day is the game between the Dallas Fuel and the Paris Eternal. Really hard game for me to pick. I was pretty back and forth on it. I originally didn't want to make it my big pick game because I was like, oh, I got really do have a 50-50 chance with this one. But I made it the big pick game because that is the spirit of the big pick, is picking the most competitive game in my eyes. And I feel like it will be the Eternal against the Fuel. I'm going to take the Eternal. I think they have looked somewhat better. The Fuel are going to be coming off of back-to-back days playing games, so typically that doesn't matter at all because these guys are pros and know what they're doing. They can do it if they really need to. The Eternal, though, I'm curious to see how they perform in this one. I think they've looked a lot better at times, but they've also looked very shaky towards the end of Stage 1. Going into their game against Chengdu in Stage 2, they looked pretty shaky as well. But I think the Fuel have also looked shaky. They were never really that impressive. I mean, they had 0 differential and a positive record. And they played Shanghai twice, and they beat them both times. So the Fuel, to me, are a team that really is not in a great spot. I don't really think the Fuel are all that great. I think they're kind of a meddling, lackluster, middle-of-the-pack team right now. While the Eternal are also in that area, I still think the Eternal have shown a little bit more than I think the Fuel have, but I could see this one going either way. Next, I have the Atlanta Reign taking on the Washington Justice. Reign fans, giving you 2 wins this week against 2 teams I don't really think are all that good, but hey, the Reign need to get wins where they need to get wins. You get them where you get them, and I think this is a really good team to get the win against if you are the Atlanta Reign. So I'm taking them against the Justice. Justice have improved. I think the Reign don't look as strong, but I think after a whole additional week under the belt, Baby Bay and the rest of the Reign will start to look better. They'll have meshed a little bit more, and they will look just fine against the Justice. Next, we have the New York Excelsior taking on the Florida Mayhem. New York Excelsior, very good team. Florida Mayhem, very bad team. New York Excelsior wins. Simple as that. Then, finally, we have the battle for LA, the LA Valiant against the LA Gladiators. I really wish I could have made this my big pick game. I originally had it as my big pick game, but I know it's not going to be a good game. The Gladiators are so good right now, and the Valiant are just so bad, and it's sad and embarrassing. I just can't. I can't pick the Valiant as much as it pains me. Gladiators have looked really, really, really good, and the Valiant are just not. So, those are all my picks. Let me know down below who you have winning all these games. But we're going to move into the league standings. As you can see here, no change up at the top. We still got New York, we still got the Titans, we still got Defiant, and we have the Shock here, still in their spot. The Dynasty dropping from the 3rd spot to now sitting in, what is that, 6th? Big drop for them, rough week for them, but I still think they have a good chance. They haven't played as many games, so they got a good shot at bouncing back, in my opinion. On the Atlantic side, of course, the Boston Uprising moving up, London Spitfire moving up, Fusion dropping down. We'll have to see where these teams end up, but the Boston Uprising have the same record as the Defiant and the Fusion. Better differential than the Fusion. They have one of the best records in the league, best differentials in the league too. They are the 4th overall team in the Overwatch League right now. So let that sink in for you there. Chengdu 200 scores moving up a little bit. Some movement in the standings. Spitfire moving up. Obviously, Houston and Dallas played no games, so their spots were not on their own whims. But we do look at the top 10 stage standings right now. Obviously, it's been 1 week. Not every team has played games. Not every team has played the same number of games. But right now, the San Francisco Shock are setting up the top. 2 wins, +8 differential. Have not lost a map yet this stage. NYXL sitting right below them at 2-0, +7 with 1 map draw under their belts. Chengdu Hunters with a 4-0 win and a 3-1 win at +6. London Spitfire at 2-0 +5. Gladiators 2-0 +3. Uprising at 2-0 +2. Titans at 1-0 +4. And Defiant at 1-1 +1. Those were if this season or the stage would end right now, those would be your stage playoff teams, with the Fuel, Outlaws, and Eternal sitting right on the outside. But obviously, Fuel and Outlaws have not played any games yet at this stage, so take that with a grain of salt. But it's early. Things can change. Things will most likely change. I'm sure they will change. But right now, pretty interesting look there. A lot of new teams that weren't in there. Weren't in the stage playoffs last stage. Hunters, Spitfire, Gladiators. So it'll be interesting to see how this stage plays out. But that is everything I have for you today. If you want to leave your own picks in the comments down below, as I said earlier, feel free to do that. But I'm going to get out of here for now. If you enjoyed, consider liking and subscribing, as it helps out a bunch with the channel. But I am going to get out of here. So thank you once again for watching, and I'll see you all next time.